Why is shame such a powerful emotion? How does it affect us mentally, physically, emotionally? I'm Nadia Davis. I'm a mom, author, attorney, and Kundalini yoga teacher who has experienced public shaming that brought me to my knees. On this podcast, I'm going to tell you how I'm living the work taking shame out of the shadows. I'll give you real-life advice and skills to take away with you throughout your day. You'll hear from powerful guests who have overcome trauma and emerged stronger than ever. You too can ban the shame within and around you. Join me. You are not alone. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Home is Within You. Today we have a very cool guest and someone that completely has transformed shame into power. Not only power for himself, but to empower other people. And I love it. I love this stuff. I love it. And so today we have Wes Geer, who founded Rock to Recovery. There is a lot of info. I encourage you to check out Rock to Recovery on Instagram. Now, Wes and I mean, are proof that recovery is possible. And I mean, from the depths, whether it's mental health, trauma, addiction, or freaking buried under the layers of our mind's shame and how it separates us from our true self and from each other. And so I want to get what on earth does that mean? Like when I say that, I say, build a home within you. It's this space of calm and clarity. And I'm going to read Wes's bio, but I'm going to get to his shame, how it showed up, and then how he created this sense of this security and stability within himself through music. And then, of course, how he's teaching other people to do that. So I'm going to hopefully pick into the heart and the soul of Mr. Wes Geer. And I think that he might have to play a tune for me to do that. So Wes is a professional musician for over 20 years. He's the founding member of Jive Records and a whole bunch of other stuff, a guitarist, a songwriter, a producer. He's toured the world for 8 years, and I would love to get into all those stories. There's a lot of interviews online. He left that life for a change, and he landed in rehab. And in 2010, he was invited to play with the legendary band Korn. He traveled the world again. And all along, he loved to teach music. So this is where he personally noticed how music helps to process these uncomfortable feelings, that nagging thing we now know is pain, is trauma coming up and getting triggered, is character defects if you're in 12-step recovery. And it also is this secret belief that we are defective because of those feelings. That is what shame is. And so he learned that music helped to tap into that, was like the bridge. And he decided to use music in his own recovery. And then he started teaching others how to use music for their recovery. Now, flash forward, it's really not that many years after that point. I mean, the process to get to that point is profound and magnificent. And then the process after that to create this giant of Rock to Recovery, where all these collaborators, all these people that are on board bringing music to people, is like mind-blowing. Okay? And it's in your soul that was calling you, that was there all along, that all of this happened. So there's a lot we can talk about, but my
Mhm.
first question is, well, how are you today?
I am fine. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I get to speak with people like you, you know?
Oh, that's very sweet. And thank you for the lovely introduction. Yeah, it's a beautiful day here, Laguna Beach, cold and crisp, and I'm just back from Costa Rica and just ate lunch. So, yeah, I'm good.
Are you looking at the coast
Right now,
from your
out the window, I was just looking outside because it was raining earlier. And I was looking up the definition of shame because I know that's a big, part of your point, the crux of a lot of what you talk about. So I just wanted to get it.
oh,
A lot of words we think we know, and then we maybe they get contorted in our mind.
right.
I mean, connotations that we create, etc.
Yeah, the reason, I mean, personally, that it came up as this theme. I mean, shame and addiction, shame and any struggle, we feel it, but sometimes we think shame is only like you should be ashamed. It's like this it's this outside thing, but the feeling of shame is a feeling of defectiveness, I've learned. And I interviewed Dr. Stephen Polter, who wrote this book, The Shame Factor, and I learned that from like a doctor, and he talks about that. But as I was writing my own story, and if you read any story of recovery, it's all like I felt separate. I didn't know what was wrong with me. And that's the part where I'm saying, okay, what were those feelings of separation? Because bam, that's where our mind separates us from our soul. And we talk about surrendering to a higher power and having a higher power, which is magnificent. But that first process of like listening to the inner child, like listening to that knowing, that soul calling, that soul relationship is, in my opinion, most impeded by that sense that we're defective, that darkness. And so how did that first show up for you, like as a kid? What did it look like? So we can help people know actually that was shame.
Well, yeah, I can give you my own experience. One thing is when we're talking about shame or any sort of self-loathing or insecurity, all that stuff that can kind of be put in the same kind of ball of disconnected emotions are, for me, were totally, I was unconscious of them really.
Right.
And what I think that the first step is to start becoming conscious of them. But I think for most people, when they're kids and they have these feelings, maybe abandonment issues, not feeling good enough, um, or even in my case where there's some sex trauma, so there's some shame buried underneath that. I wasn't aware of it. I don't know. I just know that the world's a scary place and I don't feel
Right.
good enough and I feel separate. And, that's why for me, when I got into substances, there had to be a few things happening at the same time for substances to have the effect that they did. So if you're stoked on your life and you smoke a little weed, you're happy. You're like, oh, this makes me even happier. But if you're really struggling with how you feel and you smoke or drink or whatever you do, then you get this relief that, you know, for me was probably greater than a lot of people's relief. I think that's I think that's the fertile playground
Good point.
that I
Yeah.
was playing on, and I think
Of
that,
anxiety and all that. Right.
yeah, well, it's
If
not
you've had
in most
trauma.
time, it's not diagnosed as official clinical anxiety, but yeah, it's interesting you use that word because I feel like in my own humble, unofficial assessment that alcoholics, drug addicts have kind of like a low grade anxiety disorder, just like a nervousness and whatever. So, yeah, when I took that drink or that drug, that all goes away. It's like, there it is. But I wasn't like, oh, I'm 14 and I'm so anxious and insecure and I feel so much shame. Wow, when I smoke this weed, I feel much better. I didn't know that. I was just
It's
like, oh,
not
yeah,
literal.
I want more. of what I want, more of that feeling, which I didn't realize, but I want more of that escape. But I didn't know. I was just like, oh, I want to get some more weed. I didn't even think about it.
See,
I
you're
want
hitting
to
it
drink.
on a
People
nail,
like how
though.
it is when I drink. I want to drink some more. I didn't know. I wasn't consciously aware of what I was doing.
But you're hitting it on a nail. Is like there was it's this subtle unconscious like belief that we adopted at some point, like I'm separate or I'm defective. I'm It's this really subtle, but it's a belief that our mind latched onto and then just like took a ride for a long time, and it works for a while, but you nailed it on a core. It's like it was a belief that you had that you're
That's
it,
an
but it wasn't literal. It wasn't like you said, "Oh, I'm separate." No, that's not how it happens. That's why I'm dragging it out. Do you get it?
I think it's interesting that you say it was a belief. I think that that can often be true, but I kind of go back to where the initial injury was. And it's really, when I get into the deeper work I've done with somatic healing and therapists and stuff,
Right.
where my addiction and the self and loathing, all that stuff came from, was from a original injury. My parents divorced. I felt not good enough. I had a heartbreak. I felt not good enough. But those injuries go down, they get suppressed. You're like, rise above it. Just get on with your life. It's okay. And then you're carrying. I was carrying around these injuries that had real messages. And well, in some of the work I did,
Core
back to
wound,
these
wound,
moments in
belief.
my life,
That's
some of this work I did, I would go back to these moments in my life and have to give through somatic healing and stuff. What would happen is I would get to the literal statement that I made internally as a 5-year-old, that as whatever age I was doing the therapy, I was unaware. So at 5, when my parents had a fight and divorced, I said, "You won't hurt me." So I brought that, this world's unsafe, I can be hurt, my parents, and I brought that message into the world, and I was always,
bam.
you're not going to hurt me. So yeah, it's these statements that are made in coping mechanisms and survival moments, that like landmark form calls our winning formula. Like, this is the thing that's going to help me survive in the world and thrive, but also it's a double-edged sword. It's killing me on the other side.
Exactly. You just described it. You hit it on a nail. I'm doing this core wound series, and it's like these core wound, core beliefs, and if we identify them, it's so much easier, at least for me, to observe like the fears and judgments in my head that show up today. And they don't go away, they're just there, but at least I can't take a shame ride and go in or shaming another person. So that's kind of the trick. And you've done that deeper work. But it is interesting when someone uses the word, which was used on me, like a belief, because I'm like, well, I didn't believe that. It wasn't like an active belief. It just was ingrained. It just was a mode of living, right? And did you carry that into adulthood for how long, you know?
Well, right. So the original injury is the thing that I didn't know existed and didn't want to feel at the same time. So it's coming into my life through feelings of insecurity or not feeling good enough or all these types of things. So, like, as we talked about, when I drink and use, it goes away. And then so now that's my coping mechanism, is just to kind of get loaded and stuff. And so totally consciously unaware, but obviously I'm getting more and more loaded, etc. So I'm becoming less and less aware of what's going on in me because I'm constantly stoned or drinking or whatever. And to become aware was, me having to hit bottom and start with a 12-step program that showed me, how to not drink and use, and then continue to just keep digging and do different forms of therapies. One thing too was is simple help for me too was even just doing meditation, because the act of learning to observe my thoughts, create that distance. I'm not my thoughts, watch my brain. Then I could see what I'm thinking. So I'm not going to know what I'm thinking or even be aware of the reactions I'm having to the world until I can kind of like observe myself. And when we're people have suffered trauma and stuff like that, it's kind of like I could be in a state of like hypervigilance where I'm just reacting really quick before I even know what I do. Kind of like a veteran, right? So a veteran is kind of a good metaphor. They have hypervigilance. Let's say you're a guy who spent a lot of time in some war zone going through hostile environments with guns and bombs, so your head's on the swivel. You come home, your head doesn't stop like clearing rooms and restaurants. But it's kind of like that for the trauma victim. If they feel I don't like the word victim. It's kind of like somebody who experiences trauma, emotional trauma, which by the
Survivor.
way, we all do. But before we even have a chance to notice what's going on with us, we're just in a reaction, or what
Right.
people love to call a trigger or a trauma response and all that kind of stuff. And, I know it from my own experience, and also, dating is a great reference to that. When you date somebody and you get to observe them and you're like, whoa, you're like literally in a trauma response, unaware of your emotional reaction. And really, if we trace it down, it all goes back to when your dad died and you felt abandoned. And now, it's like sometimes when you have a greater understanding, you get to observe the stuff. It makes so much more sense and you can apply it back.
So much more.
Yeah.
And then relationships become opportunities to heal. All the triggers are like, I'm going to go back and say, okay, what came up?
Our greatest
Okay.
teachers are relationships. Yeah.
Yes. Relationships are opportunities to heal. Absolutely. Completely. But it's having a relationship to our soul that's needed to build authentic relationships, in my opinion. In
Yeah.
my
I think
humble,
that's an interesting
learn
concept.
that the hard way.
Yeah. I've heard
Can,
you name that a couple times, having the relationship with our soul. To me, like if you look at a 12-step process, which people listening may or may not be fans of, but the goal is in the 12 steps is to have a spiritual experience. And my experience in working that is I had created so much chaos, done so many wrong things, gotten so much trouble, felt so much shame and guilt. I can't connect to my soul because I don't feel good about myself. So to coming and if you go in like a Christian sense, it's like sin. What is sin? Sin is separation from God. And I believe that we all are God manifest in physical form. Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is within. I'm not stuck on any one religion. I'm just drawing parallels between all the great spiritual teachers. And so when we're not healed, when we haven't addressed the pain body, when we haven't addressed the trauma and this and that, it's really hard to connect to our soul, God, whatever you want to call it. And so what's cool about the 12 steps is you get into the resentments and your fears and who you're mad at and your sex inventory, and you start cleaning out the garage. And then what happened? And then when you make your amends in the ninth step and start apologizing for the things you've done and making right all that wreckage you've done, you start coming back into connection with yourself. And so, like, for example, in the somatic healing that I do, which is literally like I talked about, finding out what did I really feel in that moment 5 years ago, not
Mhm.
by talking about it, but actually like hitting and moving and screaming, and it comes out because it's trapped in our body. Those
Right.
parts of myself were fractured off in that moment. They come back to me. I literally feel energetically come back, and then I have a deeper connection with myself and the world around me. And so
Right.
until we get digging into this stuff, I don't know that people can find their soul. There's probably people listening and go, I wish I could find my soul. I can't even find it. Well, it's like, it starts by digging into the wreckage.
So we can have all of those blocks through all these different things and modalities, but it also is simply like that imaginary friend, that intuition, that my spiritual mentor said that. It's like, well, with your kids, ask them, do you have do you have that little voice in you, that knowing, that intuition? And it really is like that simple for someone starting on a journey. And I don't want to say simple. I hate that word, but there is this like knowing. And then the world is like just opened up to the layers of the universe. We don't even have to use the word God, but there's this, through the breath you can have this like separate sense of a knowing, and listen to that voice. That's what I mean by the soul. I'm not talking about something separate. I'm talking about like that
Yeah.
true self, and all the terms I think scare people away from it. True self, God, and all those things, a higher power, but it really is that intuition, that knowing. That So for you, when, or describe like the turning point, the moment when like it kind of switched in your head, when you're started rehab, or what was the moment like, or moments when all of a sudden it hit you, I am not my body nor my thoughts. Can you describe that time? That's what I want to get into. And there's a whole nother world here for me to explore for
Hmm.
you.
Uh, that's interesting. When did I realize I'm not my body and my thoughts? Well, if I, I went in, I hit bottom with a lot of the same stuff, DUIs and drug addiction, and lost my band and all these things. And then I'm in rehab. And then I got into the big book, which was addressing the primary. It's like when we get into, if you are in a car accident and went in the hospital to do what's called triage, right? Where they're like, okay, the leg's broken, they're bleeding here. And they start working on you in the matter of importance, right? Got to stop the bleeding. Now we can work on the leg, right? So in the
Got it.
rehab, it's like I got to stop drinking and use
Mhm.
it before I can do anything else. And so that's the beginning of the process. And I remember having a little bit of a pink cloud and saying, oh, I haven't drank in 2 weeks. I feel pretty good, and I've slept and I'm eating. And then as I went to AA meetings, I started having a lot of anxiety, and I used to hear people in the meetings go, "Oh, my head's so crazy. I'm so crazy." And I
The
thought they were trying to
committees.
sound
Right.
cool. And then in time, when I finally sobered up enough and I hadn't done the recovery work, the steps and all that, now I'm just sober and I'm becoming really dry, meaning I hadn't had recovery. I'm abstinent. Then I really found the discomfort of how crazy my mind was, and I'm writing all this dark poetry, and I was like, "Oh." And then again, the teaching is like, this is what you are running from. Okay, I get it. And then, so that process is like, what's going on in my head? Why do I feel this way? And it's a long,
Long
it's a
process.
long, slow process. It's becoming aware. Like I said, I got really into meditation. Well, I was sober about 2.5 years, did a pretty good program, as they say, and then I stopped and relapsed. And then, so the second time I got sober in '07, that's when I got into meditation and really started to understand my mind so much more, and how powerful it was in dictating what was going on. But I also had another thing that would happen where,
All along, did you? I mean, you believed in a God or a higher power, but the relationship, like the meditative kind of answers and conversation that we can reach, that was like, that wasn't anywhere, right? You had a higher power or a God, right? But it was separate.
well, I was raised in the church, in the Christian church, and it was cool. I liked hanging out there. Didn't, wasn't strong one way or another. Then I kind of got into a troubled teen, life, and didn't really think much about God. But I had a roommate who was a born again Christian who's like, you gotta accept Christ. And I did that. And I just it didn't feel right intuitively with what I felt about how God and spirituality and even Christ works and all that. So I kind of was
In
like,
your
nah,
gut,
that's
you
not
had a
for me.
sense in your gut just
Well,
from
this
growing up.
burning in hell, blah blah blah. I
Okay.
just had so many. So, okay, if you're an Aboriginal tribe, but you're showing Jesus, and you're like, nah, we're going to stick to our traditions. You burn in hell. It's like, no, this story I could just tell intuitively. There
But
was a
did you
lot of
have a calling about like a like a universal one?
so there was a lot of distortions around that, but I always felt like there was something more. I
Okay.
always did. So when I was out there touring and my band was starting to have a bunch of problems, I would go behind my amp during this part of the set and just pray. And I
Mm.
didn't. I didn't know what I was praying to, and people were like, I don't know how to pray. What I didn't know either. I just got back there out of desperation, like, yo, God, this is what do you want me to do? Whatever, if you're out there, help me. And I did that all the time. So it kind of a foxhole prayer, right? Nobody believes in God, but when the bomb's coming down on your head, you're like, please, God, it's kind of like that. So yeah, and again, when we talk about God, spirituality, we're talking about like the energy that creates the whole universe and connects us all, and people want to understand that. And my understanding is that we don't get to God or that stuff through our mind; we get to it through our experiences and going within.
Exactly.
Can't think your way to God. You'll think your way right out of God. You have to kind of just go in and experience it. So yeah, and I think there's a lot of people out there that, the reason they seek God is out of desperation. A lot of addicts, a lot of mental health. It's like, I have a lot of friends who are like, non theistic and their lives are great. They don't have a need. They just feel good. They feel plugged in. They don't feel shame and guilt. They're cool. They're not addicts, but for us that really struggle, it's quite an impetus to search for that connection that's so vital that we're talking about.
And so you started praying to God, and then you started more meditation. And when was that point of like, whoa, there's this intuitive voice? Like when did you reach that? Was that kind of the point after through music, and is that still ongoing?
I think what it was for me was I got to give so much credit to the 12 steps because, when I came in, I wanted to die, I was suicidal, blah, 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 all these things destroyed my life. I had no hope. I didn't, I barely graduated high school, all these things. And my mind, right, this mind that knows it all is like, your life's over. It's going to suck, blah, blah, blah. There's no future for you that's going to be any good. But the 12 steps, says you connect with, a God of your understanding. And that to me was genius. I remember hearing, I go, oh, okay. So it doesn't have to be a Christian or Buddha. It's like I can just kind of try to find connection to something that makes sense to me. And then also the journey of the 12 steps, like I said, is to give people a spiritual experience through the process of the 12 steps. So I like to say this for people who are like, well, I don't know about spirituality. I'm into science. Okay, well, science is about saying if I do ABC, D is going to happen. And if it happens and you can repeat that and get the same result, it's now science. Well, the 12 steps say you do these 12 steps, you will have a spiritual experience significant enough to make it so you don't want to even drink or use anymore. And so when I would go into the rooms and hear people go, I was a junkie eating out of trash cans, I was a prostitute sleeping in a park, I did these 12 steps, had this transformation, and they would share stories of their life. I was like, the proof's in the pudding. Let me try this thing. So as I started to do it and I started to get relief and see connection and see serendipities and coincidences, whatever you want to call, happen for me in my life, it was like this thing's working where nothing else did.
Mhm.
And what I saw very clearly was a process is just my own personal journey to try to connect, see what's up in me, see where I can grow, see where I have to own what I'm doing wrong or my destructive behaviors, and you get all those facets going, and I drew a greater connection with the spirit of the universe.
So, what fears and judgments are the biggest challenge today, to feeling that sense of home and calm and safety within yourself?
What fears and judgments?
Do they show up, and how? I mean, that's a loaded question, but we have fear of rejection, or we have fear of abandonment, fear, or they're subtle. It's not literal.
Yeah.
But I mean, we wake up in the morning and we make our to-do list because we have to show up and fulfill this, thing. But just a side note, because I feel like the feeling of defective, again, it's not a literal that it's not literal. It shows up in this subtle fear and judgment, and we get a little separate from that middle ground where we're like, okay, I'm gonna observe my mind. I'm gonna connect to God. I'm right here in the middle, and life is going along, and I can be present. What impedes that for you?
One of my biggest triggers I struggled with a long time into my sobriety was this abandonment thing. I could try to name where it came from, maybe heartbreak, my dad, the divorce, whatever, but it took a lot of work. And it could be as simple as like, it was literally a trauma trigger. So let's say I was talking to some guy who's a musician who I think is cool, like super cool, and I text him, and then I realized 3 hours later he didn't text me back. My brain would go, he didn't text you back, like this weird traumatic response, which what it really was like, oh no, we're being hurt again. We're not, and it's like, why? I don't even care about this guy. I don't even know him. But it was an old trauma response back to that thing, you won't hurt me, right? That initial childhood statement. So, it's my survival instinct that goes, oh, here comes the pain again. And what I think is important for people to understand is, for our brain and our ego, which is really what it is, it's our ego that says, you're smaller than the bear, it can kill you, which in modern times turns out like he's muscular and more attractive and has a nicer car than you. He's better than you. Like it's the same operational,
Right.
machine of our mind working the same way. Um, Shoot, I lost my train of thought, but that was the stuff that I had to kind of like start being able to name and
No,
really
it's okay, you were saying. It's like that's our survivalist mind.
for
It's not
sure.
a literal thought, but that's exactly how the brain works. And then we are not our brains. So it's kind of like that's where that middle space of going, okay, I just had this trippy like trauma thought and response, but I'm here. I'm calm, I'm collected. I know where that came from. And if I kind of was frazzled and went, do you know what I'm saying? Like all the work you did makes you aware so you can actually do you when you know that memory or that trauma response comes up. The question is, where do we go to process that wound that still needs healing? And that's also how relationships can work to heal more is like, how would you describe your place to kind of go? It doesn't mean like, okay, hold on 5 minutes. I'm going to go meditate over it right now on the beach. Maybe, yes. But I mean, like within yourself, how do you describe that sense of safety and calm that you've created in yourself, that home?
Well, so when I would first have responses like this, I realized I had them back when I was drinking and using, but I used to think they were just a bad buzz. Then as I got sober, I would notice I'd feel really dark and go, why am I so dark now? And I'd go, oh, that's right. 2 hours ago, Johnny said that thing to me and it triggered me, but I wasn't even consciously aware. But internally in my body, I had the response. So as it took me a while to grow in understanding of myself, and it wasn't about spiritual bypassing. Oh, I got a trigger. Let me know how good I am. And I mean, sure, self affirmations are great, but it was going literally into those traumas, those injuries, and dealing with them and processing them out. So, like you said earlier, they don't go away. But I think when we work on them, we can heal them and diminish them greatly. So when they pop up, you're like, oh, there's that thing. And yeah, yeah. What I do is I call it
You
spiritual.
trust yourself now. You have that safe place to be vulnerable for like the little boy. I know this sounds all wordy, but it really is like creating that safe place. If we can't find it outside us, or if we're used to reaching for a drink, which you were, it's like you can see you acknowledge now. You're using your brain to your benefit. You see that switch to like say, okay, that was that trigger. I'm going to hold my little boy right now, and not a literal thought, but that is what you are doing.
Um, yeah. Now I call it like a spiritual kung fu where Um, I don't know if people or you've heard this, but like in the old kung fu movies, the guy would come in and he would do the tiger. It's like, oh, how do I take on the guy who does the tiger? And there's a defense for that. Then there's a guy who does the craw. Um,
I love spiritual kung fu. That's
and
perfect.
so, yeah, when those things come in and I have experience with them, oh, this is my trigger here. I know how to move within them. And the way out is the way is through, right? The way out
Mhm.
is through. So I have to sometimes just feel them and let them process and name them. So,
Right.
sometimes people they don't want to feel the pain or the disconnection, and they just want to go back. Oh, I'm just going to go meditate and feel, or I'm going to tell myself I love myself too much. It's like, well, that oftentimes is spiritual bypassing. So, I've learned that I have to sit often with those feelings in a productive way, not a like morose or self pity way, but let me feel what's coming up for me and journal it and name it and understand it. And then I can grow with it. Like
Right. And
what
that's a
happens for a lot of people is they go out of their body and the big book of AA calls it strange mental blank spots, but it happens for a lot of people where they just want to leave and go on to the next thing. Ooh, that's uncomfortable. Let me just switch. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going over here, and it's a blank response where we leave our body and go on to the next thing. But like with the other day with my
no, you gotta
girlfriend, okay,
feel it all and have that circle around that no judgment. It's like they're processing. They're
stay
processing.
in it. Yeah. So like the other day, I'll get really vulnerable here. Is like I was with my girlfriend, and there's some stuff I know that I have way deep in there. Like it's not really presenting itself in the world. Nobody would know, but it's deeper level stuff I'm working on. So I had her on my lap in a, intimate moment. I'm not talking about sex. We were just like, talking to each other. It's very cute. And I
Mhm.
felt this energy come up that was so subtle. And I know through the teaching and therapists and my friends who are therapists at work, it's like I wanted to leave and I was like, okay, I got to go to the bathroom. Like, wait, no. Let me sit in this. And I started naming it with her. We were staring into each other's eyes, and I go, let me talk to you what's going on. And as I named it, which seemed like nothing. I wasn't upset. I wasn't triggered. We weren't having a fight. It was nothing. But as I named it and dug into that, I broke out into a sob. And it was an old feeling that I had from long ago. So I started doing like asking her to say things that I knew would help me process the space. And we were saying things back and forth. And I sobbed like I had never sobbed in decades because I went down into the pain
Yes.
and that's how I heal. That's how I know it, and I can let it out. And I have a
Yes.
tattoo right
That
here.
is beautiful.
This
And
says
that's where we all
Thai.
wanna go. I mean, that was a beautiful example.
Thank you.
Beautiful,
This in
because you
Thai
learn to
says
do that
feel
within your
everything.
sorry, let me see.
It's in Thai, and it says feel everything. We got to
Yes.
feel to heal.
You learned to do that for yourself, and then you were able to do it openly with another. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay. So give us that's awesome. I could talk to you forever about this. Um, okay, give us the lowdown on I mean, all this beautiful work you did is transformed into the awesomeness of Rock to Recovery. What is up and front and center with you and your work as well as Rock to Recovery?
Yeah. So my journey definitely is a spiritual one. And when I say that, what I mean is out of the desperation and being so lost time and again, going back to stuff that sounded crazy and pie in the sky ish, I applied the spiritual principles in my life. So, I'm 2.5 years sober. The second time, my mind said, you can't play music sober. It's not how it works. Your career is done. But I felt like I was still supposed to play. When I got in tune with myself, I was like, no, I feel like I'm still supposed to play. So I started doing these awe meditations for manifestation. There's one by Wayne Dyer, and that's when I got first into meditation. And all these crazy things started happening. Like I would almost have premonitions of stuff. I know it sounds crazy before it happened, and I would go, that'll never happen.
Totally.
And it would happen time and again. And I started saying, okay, universe, I want to get back into music. It better
You
not
start
be
having faith, then the faith was really there. I don't mean faith in a God, but like in the process, in the transition of this life, you're changing the spiritual life. Do you know
yeah.
what I mean?
Well, Joe
Surrendering.
Dispenza he's scientific kind of meditation dude who wrote a book called Becoming Supernatural. But anyhow, he
Mhm.
says, look at the breadcrumbs, and ask the universe to give you signs. So as I started meditating, all these crazy things were happening. And then I asked the universe to get back into music, and I wanted to play with a band, like a big band. I want to get in a van. I'm too old. I'm 38 years old, or however old I was at the time. And within starting that meditation to get back into music through manifestation, the band Korn hit me up. Within 10 days of doing that meditation, out of nowhere, I got a text, and they weren't like buddies of mine. And like, hey, you want to come play guitar with us? I was like, what the hell? And as I was trying to
Mm.
land that gig, when I went out to make an amends to my father for my AA steps, as the story goes, I didn't want to spend the last of my money to fly north of Reno, drive 3 hours to stay with my dad in his little ranch to make an amends. I wanted to get the Korn gig. But as I was like, well, that's my spiritual life. That's my AA life. I got to put my recovery first. I flew out to see my dad, and then Korn was playing in town that night. So it's like all these things are lining up,
While
right?
you're doing this meditation for manifestation
Yeah.
and you're
And
having these
so you
knowings.
start
Beautiful.
start seeing it working, and so anyhow, I toured with Korn for a while, totally sober. It's an important part of my story. And when the gig was going away, the original guy came back, who I was filling in for. I went back to the meditation. I was into self pity. Like, what am I supposed to do now? I'm a broke, out of work musician. Thanks, universe. You really screwed me again. I just realized I'm not put here on this earth to suffer. I know that's not what I'm here for. I feel like I'm supposed to be a musician, and I definitely am supposed to be sober. I'm going to die. So, how can I be a musician who's sober and help the world and make a living? And that was the key. And that's something, again, I learned in AA. Now, it's not that AA made up all this stuff that I'm espousing here, but it's stuff that I accessed because I was in AA that other people might get through church or other ways or spiritual leaders. But I was taught that life is about helping others and giving back. And that's something that, although it sounded cool, I never did that in my previous life. So, that's when I had the idea to create a program that we could bring music into treatment centers. I had been to rehab, we painted pictures, we did yoga, but there was no music there. I had my guitar when I was in rehab, and I saw how it could change the room. 22 insecure guys, with their life in the shitter. I break out my guitar, and the whole energy of the room changed. So I wanted to figure out how I could create a program that I could use and integrate into treatment curricula, if you will. And
Mhm.
that's when I started Rock to Recovery with the idea to go in and write songs, show non musicians how to express and how emotions turn into lyrics and words, and to write music and use that as a vehicle of expression.
So
And
how
so
long ago was that?
I was just going to say, great question. Founded the organization on 12/12 of 12, just hoping I could get a couple of bucks coming in to pay my rent. And here we are in our 11th year. We got, I think 17 people on our team right now, plus a board of directors, of course. And
I just had an awesome 10-year celebration, and
yeah,
we were just
that's where we,
mind-blowing for you, right? Was
oh,
it just
it's mine.
surreal?
Yeah,
Yes.
so we do 600 sessions a month, and yeah, you were there. It was so great to see you. And one of the best moments of my entire life was at that event where my team made a video montage. So we had a fundraiser. Rock Recovery has a nonprofit segment, and we
So
did
this
a
is like bringing music into treatment centers and to vets.
yeah,
And I mean, there's a book, schools, they even have meditations on the website, which is pretty cool. Recovery coaches,
yeah,
sober companions. But the thing that's beautiful is, like, you had this idea. I believe that was your soul, your true self. I'm going to
yeah,
get music into treatment centers, and look at this. It's 10 years later, and what, you're doing it, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. So
What do
that
you
yeah, the culminated in the greatest moment of my life that I was saying is
Yeah.
my team surprised me with a video montage, all sharing how because they're all musicians, right? But before working for Rock Recovery, they maybe were in bands or just, hobby musicians. A lot of them were in legit bands. And they all did a video montage of how working for Rock Recovery and getting to write songs with people who are hurting, suicidal people, like you said, wounded warriors, how much that has changed their life, and hearing that. So this is what I call the vortex of radness, is because it's when we start sharing this energy. So they're sharing an energy out into the world that the clients are like, oh my God, that was so amazing. So they're getting high, if you will, off of that feeling of fulfillment and making a difference in the world that they're reflecting back to me. And it just made me start crying. And so when we share this energy back and forth, we're helping each other, we're helping the world. It creates this vortex of energy that is super, super
Energy,
powerful.
love, light, warmth. And yes, that was there.
Yeah, it's so I'm
That
blessed,
is,
and none of it would have happened without my trauma, pain, addiction, rehab, and so I really believe that we're all here on the journey for our soul to go through what it needs to go through to heal and transcend.
yes. And that is what you've done. And we are never alone. There is this love and light and warmth and energy that is there, and it's calling each of us. And thank you so much for being a warrior of that light. Okay.
My pleasure.
Thank you
Thank you
so
also
much for
for,
bringing it to others. Okay.
yeah, thanks for sharing the space and doing what you're doing. We all have a voice to use, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
For our little boy and little girl within us, there's a home.
Amen.
Yes. You are not alone. If you are dealing with shame and trauma, please reach out to me through my website, nadia-davis.com. You can get a free band shame tip sheet and find out about upcoming events. I'd love it if you picked up my book, Home is Within You, wherever books are sold. If you like this podcast, please tell a friend, leave a review, and make sure to follow me on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Sending warm hugs.